Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and I put off digging into the Shattered Grid after story for quite a while, mainly because by all accounts, and I mean literally every account I've seen, it really wasn't worth getting into, what with it not being any good, apparently. But with all the hype surrounding issue 40 of MMPR post Beyond the Grid, it's really good by the way. I figured it was high time to catch up on this rather divisive arc and discuss what happened, and if this particular story even deserves the level of vitriol thrown its way. So, as most of us know, the story of Beyond the Grid was created to present us with the aftermath of everything Lord Drakkon did. Basically, a lot of timeline-altering stuff as well as a butt-ton of Morphing Grid details that really don't end up telling us that much more about it. And because of these universe-disrupting events, a group of Rangers, some with their powers barely intact and some without any power at all, have found themselves rematerialized in a lost galaxy, but not that one. And all this happened because the Prometheus was caught mid-warp during the dimensional shifting, so that's a solid enough sci-fi reason to explain how they got here in the first place. So this storyline became the main storyline for a total of 9 issues before the aforementioned issue 40 returns to normal form, except not completely. But to speak any further on that would be spoiler territory. The first thing that stands out about Beyond the Grid is how interesting it is conceptually. A ragtag group of Rangers needing to form an impromptu team to stave off some bigger threat is something I literally write about, as you guys know, so naturally I think the basic idea can hold up just fine, if done right. We'll talk plenty about the characters, but as a concept, I think Beyond the Grid had a great idea. You can't just hand-wave away something as big as Drakkon. Even a fully repaired world should still carry with it some signs of what transpired, or what was the point of it all. So the immediate repercussion of Grace trying to save everyone from Drakkon's terror is being lost in space without a solid connection to the Morphing Grid. That, I thought, was one of the best implemented ideas, because what better way to present this lengthy epilogue than to show a slew of Rangers struggling with their powers, the source of which assisted in putting a sizable dent on reality in the first place. Would have been really void of tension or stakes if, after all of that, everything just came back to them so easily. So Beyond the Grid instead smartly chooses to work through that considerable problem and find a solution. That's all well and good, but you knew there was going to be a but. The ways and means they go about it narratively leave a bit to be desired. And it all ties into how the main characters of this particular arc develop and relate to each other, for better and for worse. Now, beyond all the random terminology, MacGuffins galore, and at times overbearing lore cramming, what this story is really all about is retaining hope and either finding connections or staying connected to those around you. This works to great effect with Heckle, who finally gets to live out the fan dream of seeing the Dark Ranger suit in a Western property. What we see with him is how fear and uncertainty allowed him to fall back into the same trap that originally doomed Sentai 6 before he became bonded with Snide. He got a second chance, and history almost repeated itself. And now, Xenowing's blood is forever on his hands. This backstory reveal does well to connect him with Hunger Games Kim, who comes into the story with a pre-established regret regarding her former status as a Drakkon servant. Both of them have carved out second chances for themselves, but both of them still struggle with the burden they'll have to carry with them forever. And that would be a great, natural way to connect these two Rangers that do have a lot in common, if not for the fact that the story bends over backwards to point out how much they have in common. A little bit of subtlety goes a long way. But even still, I'm led to believe that what they established here is what Beyond the Grid was meant to be, which makes sense. When everything around you is either unknown or a possible threat, interpersonal connections should drive the story a lot more, because it's the one piece of familiarity our characters can latch onto for now. But this general idea is really only ever followed through on twice, once here and again with the best part of this arc, the Solar Ranger herself, and neither in a completely fulfilling way. We'll get to her, but first, whoo boy, we gotta talk about Cam, or whoever the hell Sola's samurai amulet and claimed to be Cam, cause Chief, that really ain't it. But before that, a necessary tangent. I don't often comment on the art style of any topic I cover because my artistic skills, quite frankly, have more in common with grade school finger painting than any of the fantastic work real illustrators do. And honestly, Beyond the Grid isn't an exception to that. Simone Demio does an excellent job at creating the tapestry of this new world. The colors and visuals of this other Lost Galaxy clearly did take some design inspiration from the original Lost Galaxy, as everything leaps right off the page when conveying the great beyond. And the overall rougher textures in spots not focusing on the wider shots mostly do well to complement the story. You'll notice that in early issues, the scenes are drowning in drearier color palettes, and the characters look aged up and weary, speaking to the bleakness of their situation. But then, once we find hope in the form of a planet's worth of unrefined Zeo crystals, there's a brightness to it all, and even the characters look much softer and cleaner. The visual aspects of this tale are adding to the story, highlighting how it ebbs and flows, and isn't just another part of said story. Again, I'm no artist, not even close, so take this interpretation with a grain of salt. But given how much this story had to shine visually, what with all the new worlds to explore, they did a pretty fantastic job at telling the story through visuals. So because of that, I can be a bit more forgiving on just how much they botched Cam's character design, but less forgiving on how much they treated Cam as an actual character. I won't belabor the point too much, but Cam's Beyond the Grid interpretation feels more like literally any one of his Ninja Storm teammates. You know, the ones he felt constantly put upon by because they were jokesters and he absolutely wasn't. It's as if they adapted Cyber Cam instead of actual Cam. It's just a surface level reading of the season he's from, and it makes much of this story on a writing level feel less like the more refined Boom Comics entries and much more like a first or second draft. But even that could have been salvaged by way of the idea they couldn't cleanly work in regarding Cam's need to be the funny one now. Instead of him going through a character 180, they could have shown him struggling to be funny, specifically because that's the type of team dynamic he's accustomed to. And despite his nagging, it worked for the Ninja Storm crew. It beat Lothor. So maybe he's thinking that if he tries replicating that on this team, a team much more joyless than his own, they can succeed again. Not too bad of a character trajectory, and it would show that despite his natural inclinations towards sarcasm and implied eye-rolling, he did internalize what it meant to be on a team, and what everyone brought to it. But instead, we get comic relief Cam, who ultimately has no notable contributions to the story or his new team. The wonky way Cam is written for, sadly, also spread to Tanya, as well as, for whatever reason, her romantic fling with Mike. Tacked on? Yes. Harmless? Sure. Could have been special? Well, that's basically my thesis statement here. So Tanya is arbitrarily given the role of Team Heart here because she was kind of, sorta, maybe that in her Zeo days, but just barely. But said role only ever really impacts Mike, and the understandable trauma he feels being in the same position Leo was in when he sacrificed himself. This character point is also undercut to a degree by the writing that really needs to blurt out just how sacrificial Mike is. And it really reads like there wasn't ever a clean resolution between wanting to craft a story the fans will know, or over-explaining things for the readers that wouldn't know otherwise. But then, the things that should probably come to the light never get brought up. For example, Mike and Tanya both made the hard decision to leave their homes behind. Mike made that choice for keeps, and Tanya made that choice while still a child, before getting instantly snapped into her teenage years. So one could surmise that neither of their family lives prior to becoming Rangers were terribly ideal. That's a connecting point, if I ever saw one, and if we absolutely have to go the romance route here, might as well make it count. Even just a little bit, if only to avoid making hollow interracial couples a worrying Ranger trend. But outside of all of that, Mike is pretty fine here, and exploiting that aforementioned sacrificial nature was one of the only smart things the creator did. The KO-35 siblings are here too! You'd be forgiven for completely forgetting that. There's this germ of a neat idea in there about both of them coming from different times, and thus are in two different places with regards to how they view each other, but it's never really allowed to grow. But the story really starts and ends with Alarian, or Ari, the Solar Ranger, and this is really where the concept and the character come together pretty nicely. Her concept being that her powers only work as they're supposed to when she can focus them through connections formed. That's a pretty cool angle, juxtaposed against her troubled, orphaned past that lends itself to the difficulty of trusting others as well as herself, which she embodies. Not to mention that she doesn't fully understand the will of the Solatrix to start, so it's that much harder to travel the stars with clarity. Adding to that, the Praetor knows what powers her, so destroying the planets and the people she helps keeps her struggling, keeps her questioning her purpose, as well as fulfills his own maniacal agenda. This mostly worked out well in the story, especially with Remy worked into the mix, serving as a solid representative of Ari's need for connection, at times clashing with the pressure she feels to distance herself. But I think the resolution of her staying strong, specifically because she does come to trust this new team of hers, is just an okay one. The concept itself is nice, but the execution is really what holds this story back. And what Ari reminds me of as a concept is similar to my major critique of Power Rangers 2017. In the movie, Billy is built up as the focal point of the team, the man who connects everything and everyone, so losing him should bring the team together. Except it doesn't quite stick, because beyond Jason, we have no reason to believe that any of these kids would suddenly become self-sacrificing specifically because Billy died. A similar thing happens here, where we're told that the connections Ari has built up matter, but where was she when Heckel was doling out his backstory? Andros never talks to her about the fact that he also had trouble connecting with people, but needed to, so he could also help stave off a galactic threat. The Rangers know her well enough, because backstory, but she never really connects with a lot of them beyond Kim. They use that connection to pretty decent effect. Kim is allowed to coin the name Solar Ranger, in addition to the pair sharing a moment once the Zords are up and running. But Kim is the 2017 Jason here, which means Ari only ever interacts with everyone else, but never meaningfully engages with anyone else, outside of Remy of course, and maybe Tanya. And the big sweeping help all planets thing the Rangers do is basically a montage, so while it does add to Ari's sense of comfort, it doesn't really hold much weight in the grand scheme of things. So the idea that she can then empower them all in the end as unified Solar Rangers rings a bit hollow. And that also occurred almost immediately after the entire team was at each other's throats, so you'd be hard pressed to believe that everyone just automatically got on the same page again that quickly. And it's tough, because I feel what they're going for. I like what they're going for. But the path getting there doesn't sell you on the idea that this team is truly united. Because the relative brevity of the story, in addition to the devil-may-care consistency of the characters and their arcs, makes unity really hard to convey. But hey, at least among all the actual romances and implied romances, they got one right. Technically, it's not explicitly stated, but the way they play off each other, the way their shared history is implied and not always just shoved in our face, and the way they're drawn in some frames, all point to the creators really wanting us to ship these two. I'm not too big on the concept of shipping myself, but hey, Ari and Remy are cute together, so I'll take it. And are much more believable than my secret headcanon. Anyways, moving right along, I do think the central ideas here would have been easier to convey if a slightly different team had been utilized, and by that I mean a team of Rangers that have all struggled with being alone, or had been hesitant to trust their teammates. So on that front, Rangers like Eric and Taylor, who by the way do come with an established history, would work a lot better than Mike and Tanya. And yeah, part of that is admittedly me being a diehard Taylor fan and wanting to see her in more stuff, but also, consider this. Using their previous standoffish natures as shorthand means you don't even need to directly connect them to Ari. It's implied that they've been there and done that. It's implied that they do have a lot in common, so they can pick up what she's putting down much faster than most of the team. And if this story builds itself on connections, why not run it through the Rangers that had to put the most legwork into connecting? All in all, Beyond the Grid is not without its flaws. It buries you in buzzwords and unengaging exposition you won't remember, all helmed by a villain that's hard to care about. The characters are making it up as they go, but not in a way that neatly ties into the fact that they are stranded and kind of have to make it up as they go. Most of the dynamics fall anywhere inside the bounds of incomplete or missing entirely, and because of all of that, everything that's good or even great about the story, from a lot of the art to Ari herself, comes with some sort of caveat. It's not offensively bad, and it's certainly not worth hating, but taken all together, it's still a very average story. I still enjoyed it, in parts, but I'll tell you, getting through some of those pages felt like actual work. so I think it falls short of the also flawed but much more complete Soul of the Dragon tale. And yes, if you guys want a review for that now that I've broken this damn wide open, I might take a closer look at it down the line. Despite all that though, I admire the mindset Boom is taking with both sets of comics. I love the fact that we get to see their take on more than just the Mighty Morphin world, and I hope we continue to get these mini adventures moving forward alongside the mainline entries because the possibilities really are limitless, and I can't wait to see what else they have in store for us. As long as it's a Wild Force one-off, please Boom, don't make me beg. But until then, thanks for watching.